At my son's high school graduation, I arrived early to keep the peace, then froze when I saw another man standing in the seat marked Father, while my own parents smiled beside him. I thought I was about to be humiliated in silence. I had no idea what my son was about to do next. My name is Daniel Mercer, and by the time my son Caleb graduated high school, I had already spent 6 years learning what it felt like to be erased while still breathing. I was 39 that spring. I lived alone in a modest townhouse on the edge of Dayton, Ohio, in a neighborhood full of identical mailboxes, trimmed lawns, and the kind of quiet that only made loneliness louder. Every other week, Caleb stayed with me from Friday night to Sunday evening. Every other week, I waited for those 2 days like a man waiting for rain in a drought. People love to say divorce is common now. Like that makes it easier. Like statistics soften the sound of a door closing on your old life. In my case, the divorce itself had been ugly, but survivable. What came after was worse, much worse, because I didn't just lose a marriage. I lost my place in my own family. My ex-wife, Vanessa, moved on fast. Too fast, if you ask me. Though nobody did. Within a year, she was married to a man named Brent Holloway. Brent had money, polished teeth, a deep voice that sounded practiced, and the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. He sold medical equipment, wore expensive watches, and had a talent for walking into rooms like he belonged there more than anyone else. My parents loved him almost immediately. That was the part that cut the deepest. It would have been one thing if my parents had stayed neutral, if they had kept the peace for Caleb's sake, if they had looked me in the eye and said, "You are still our son, no matter what happened." But they didn't. The moment Brent started showing up to family dinners with bottles of wine and easy charm, they folded toward him like iron toward a magnet. My mother, Elaine, called him such a steady man. My father, Richard, slapped him on the back and laughed at jokes that weren't even funny. They admired his money, his polished manners, the way he talked about private schools and investment accounts. Brent knew exactly how to perform for them, and they rewarded him for it by slowly pushing me out of the frame. At first it was subtle. They started inviting Vanessa and Brent to things without telling me. Then they began posting photos online. Christmas brunch, Easter lunch, Caleb's baseball games. In picture after picture, Brent stood where I used to stand, hand on Caleb's shoulder, smile wide, my mother beaming beside him like she had finally found the son she deserved. Whenever I brought it up, my mother acted wounded. "Daniel, don't be dramatic. We're just trying to keep things civil." My father was worse. He'd look at me over his glasses and say, "Maybe if you hadn't let your marriage fall apart, things wouldn't be so complicated." That sentence stayed with me for years. Maybe if you hadn't let your marriage fall apart, as if I had single-handedly wrecked everything. As if Vanessa hadn't spent the last year of our marriage treating me like an inconvenience in my own home. As if I hadn't found messages on her phone from Brent while we were still in counseling. As if I hadn't sat in a freezing therapist's office, hands locked together so tightly my knuckles hurt, begging her to at least try for Caleb's sake. But once Brent arrived with his tailored suits and easy money, the story changed. I became the bitter ex, the unstable one, the man who couldn't provide the life Vanessa deserved. None of that would have destroyed me if Caleb had believed it too. But he didn't. That boy saw more than anyone realized. He was 17 then. Quiet in the way thoughtful people are quiet. He had my dark hair, my stubborn jaw, and his mother's eyes. He wasn't loud or dramatic. He watched. He remembered. And even when he said very little, I could feel him measuring the room, taking in every slight, every fake smile, every moment Brent overstepped. I tried not to poison him against his mother. I tried even harder not to make him choose. If he came to my house upset, I listened. If he defended Brent out of guilt or confusion, I kept my mouth shut. If he sat beside me on the porch swing and stared out at the yard in silence, I let the silence be enough. Because being his father had never been about winning. It was in the small things. Teaching him how to shave when he cut himself twice and pretended it didn't sting. Staying up until 2 in the morning, helping him finish a history project made of cardboard and glue. Sitting on the bleachers through cold wind and bad umpire calls while he played baseball. Holding the back of his bike seat years ago, running down the sidewalk until he yelled, "Dad, let go," and I realized I already had. Those were the pieces of fatherhood nobody could see in a photo. nobody except Caleb. Still, as graduation approached, the pressure around me started building like a storm. Graduation should have been simple: proud parents, cameras, folded chairs, a teenager in a cap and gown stepping into the next chapter of his life. But with my family, nothing stayed simple for long. It started with the tickets. Caleb's school gave each graduate 6 reserved seats close to the stage and then opened general admission behind them. Caleb called me the night the envelopes came home. I was in my kitchen, heating leftover chili. Rain tapped softly against the window over the sink. "Dad," he said, and I could hear the tension in his voice right away. "Mom's making this weird." I turned the stove down and leaned against the counter. "What happened?" "She says the front row seats should go to people who've been the biggest support system this year." There was a long pause. I felt my jaw tighten. "And let me guess," I said quietly, "Brent is one of those people." Another pause. Then Caleb exhaled hard through his nose. "Yeah." The kitchen suddenly felt too small. The smell of chili turned sour in my stomach. "What did you say?" "I told her you're my dad." I closed my eyes for a second. And she said I was being immature. That word, immature. Adults always use it when a child tells the truth they don't want to hear. I sank into a chair at the kitchen table. "What do you want to do?" He didn't answer right away. I could hear voices in the background at his mother's house. Cabinet doors opening. A TV murmuring somewhere. The ordinary sounds of a home where a war was being fought in whispers. "I want you there," he said at last. "That's what I want." "I'll be there," I told him. "Front row or back wall, I'll be there." He got quiet after that, and I knew there was more he wasn't saying. Caleb had learned, the hard way, that speaking plainly in that house came with consequences. Cold shoulders, sharp comments, his mother crying on command, Brent stepping in with that fake calm voice, talking about respect while stealing space that wasn't his. A few days later, my mother called. That alone told me trouble was coming. She rarely called unless there was a script she wanted followed. "Daniel," she said, drawing my name out in that careful tone she used when pretending to be reasonable. "I just wanted to speak to you before graduation so there won't be any unpleasantness." I stood in my driveway with my phone pressed to my ear, the late afternoon sun hot on my neck. Unpleasantness? Yes. About the seating. Vanessa has worked very hard coordinating everything, and Brent has really stepped up for Caleb these last few years. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because sometimes the truth is so shameless it knocks a sound out of you. My mother kept going. "We all think it would be more appropriate if Brent sat in the father's reserved seat. You understand, Daniel? Caleb lives in that household. Brent has been there day to day." There it was, not even disguised. I looked across the street at a kid bouncing a basketball in his driveway and felt my heartbeat thudding behind my ribs. "I am Caleb's father. Biologically, of course," she said too quickly. "No one is denying that. Biologically." I can still feel what that word did inside me, like somebody had taken a knife and slowly turned it. I lowered my voice because anger, at that point, was the only thing holding me upright. "If I hear one more person talk about my son, like I donated DNA and disappeared, I'm going to stop being polite." She gasped softly, offended. "Daniel, this is exactly the kind of behavior that pushes people away." "No," I said. "What pushes people away is replacing your own son with whichever man has a nicer suit." She hung up on me after that. The week before graduation passed in a blur of bad sleep and clenched teeth. I still went to work, still answered emails, still smiled at customers and signed forms, and pretended I wasn't unraveling inside. But at night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan, thinking about reserved seats and public humiliation, and the way my own parents had chosen an audience-friendly lie over me. And under all of it was one thought I couldn't shake. They weren't just trying to hurt me. They were trying to rewrite my son's story while he sat there and watched. By the morning of graduation, I already knew they had planned something ugly. I could feel it in my bones. The gym would be packed, cameras would be up, names would be called, and somewhere in that polished little ceremony, they intended to make a statement about who counted and who didn't. They thought I would sit there, swallow it, and smile for Caleb's sake. They were wrong about many things, but they were most wrong about him. I drove to the school an hour early. That was how badly I wanted to avoid a scene. I told myself if I got there first, if I kept my head down, if I stayed calm, maybe I could survive whatever Vanessa and my parents had planned without ruining Caleb's day. I wore the same navy suit I'd bought for a work banquet 2 years earlier. It wasn't expensive, but it was clean, pressed, and the tie Caleb had once told me made me look less grumpy. I remember adjusting that tie in the rearview mirror with fingers that wouldn't stop trembling. The school gym had been decorated to look more elegant than it really was. Blue and silver streamers hung from the rafters. Folding chairs were lined up in stiff rows on the polished floor. The stage was crowded with potted plants, a podium, and a banner with the school crest stretched across the back wall. The air smelled like floor wax, perfume, and too many people trying to hold themselves together in public. Parents milled around with bouquets and cameras. Grandmothers dabbed at their eyes before anything had even started. Fathers straightened collars and checked programs. Everywhere I looked, there were little islands of family, people leaning toward each other, laughing, claiming their places. I stood there alone with my folded ticket in my hand. A volunteer at the entrance smiled at me and pointed toward the reserved floor section. "Family seating is down front, sir." I nodded and walked that way, my heart pounding. Every step felt too loud. I spotted the row labeled for Caleb's last name almost immediately. White cardstock signs had been clipped to the chairs. Mother, grandfather, grandmother, father, stepfather, sibling. I stopped cold. For a second, I genuinely thought I was reading it wrong. The edges of the room blurred. Sound dropped away. All I could hear was the dull rush of blood in my ears. Then I saw Brent. He was already there, one hand resting casually on the chair labeled father, talking to my father like they were old friends at a country club. Brent wore a charcoal suit, pale blue tie, shiny brown shoes, relaxed, prepared, comfortable. He looked like a man who had been promised a role and had shown up early to enjoy it. My mother saw me first. The smile on her face faltered, then rearranged itself into that brittle politeness she used when she knew she was doing something cruel, but wanted witnesses to think otherwise. "Daniel," she said too brightly, "you made it." I walked up to the row and stared down at the signs again, making myself read them one more time, as if repetition might somehow make them less obscene. "What is this?" Vanessa appeared then, gliding down the aisle with that smooth, composed expression she used in public. Perfect hair, cream-colored dress, diamond earrings Brent had probably bought her. She had one hand on the shoulder of our daughter. No, not daughter. My mind was scrambled. On the shoulder of her niece. No, scratch that. Focus. She was alone when she came over. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to clench the graduation program just to hide it. She stopped in front of me and lowered her voice. "Please don't do this here." I looked at her. "Do what?" "Notice that you gave my seat to another man." Brent shifted beside us, not moving away from the chair. "Daniel, today is about Caleb." That voice, calm, measured, designed to make me sound unstable by comparison. I turned to him. "Then get out of the seat marked father." He lifted his chin slightly. "I'm not trying to replace you." "Really?" I said. "Because you're standing in my place with my parents beside you." A few nearby families had begun pretending not to listen. That's the thing about public humiliation. Even when people look away, you can feel them staring. Vanessa pressed her lips together. "You are making this harder than it needs to be." "Harder," I repeated. "You printed a label calling another man my son's father at his graduation. It says stepfather," she snapped. I pointed at the signs, "and he's still sitting in the father's row." My father finally stood up, slow, irritated, like I was a problem interrupting a nice evening. "That's enough." I stared at him. "You're really doing this?" He folded his arms. "Brent has been there consistently. He's in Caleb's daily life. We thought the arrangement made practical sense." Practical. That word nearly made me laugh in his face. My mother jumped in quickly, voice soft and poisonous. "No one is excluding you, Daniel. There are plenty of seats in the guest section right behind us." I looked past her. 3 rows back, behind the reserved section, was open seating, scattered, off to the side. The kind of place you give to distant cousins and neighbors who came out of obligation. The message was crystal clear. Brent got the honored seat. I got overflow. I wish I could tell you I handled that moment with grace, that I breathed deeply, smiled sadly, and rose above it. But that isn't what happened. My chest felt tight. My skin burned. My mouth went dry. It was one thing to be insulted privately. It was another thing to have your role as a father publicly reduced to a seating adjustment. And the worst part was that Caleb hadn't even walked in yet. He was somewhere in the hallway behind the gym, probably fixing his gown, probably trying to calm his own nerves, having no idea what these people had done in his name. I leaned toward Vanessa and kept my voice low. Did Caleb approve this? Her eyes flickered for half a second. That was answer enough. Don't drag him into this, she said. So he doesn't know. Brent stepped forward. You need to lower your voice. I looked at him, and something inside me went cold. Not explosive. Cold. You don't get to instruct me on tone where my son is concerned. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He didn't have to. He had the seat. He had the public image. He had my parents lined up beside him like props. A teacher near the stage tested the microphone. The sound squealed through the gym, making everyone wince. More guests were filing in. The ceremony was minutes away from starting. Vanessa glanced around nervously. Please, for once think about Caleb instead of your pride. That hit me so hard, I actually took a step back. My pride. I had missed dinners, so I could pay support on time. I had driven 2 hours after work to make Caleb's away games because his mother forgot to tell me the schedule until the last minute. I had kept my mouth shut through years of quiet disrespect because I didn't want my son caught in the middle. I had swallowed every insult, every exclusion, every smug look from Brent because Caleb deserved at least one parent who acted like an adult. And now this woman was standing in front of me, after all of that, calling it pride. I looked at her for a long second and said, very quietly, one day, you are going to realize what you taught him by doing this. She didn't answer. A volunteer came down the aisle and asked everyone to take their seats. Brent sat in the chair marked Father without hesitation. My father sat beside him. My mother adjusted her shawl and refused to look at me. Vanessa moved to the edge of the row, close enough to complete the illusion for anyone glancing over. I stood there for another second, feeling every face around us, every whisper I imagined, whether it was real or not. Then I walked to the guest section, third row from the back, far right side, half blocked by a support pole, wrapped in silver ribbon. I sat down alone and placed the folded program on my knee, because my hands still needed something to do. That was when it really hit me. Not just the insult, the loneliness of it. There are humiliations that burn hot and fast. Then there are the quiet ones. The ones where you sit in a crowded room full of cheering families and realize nobody saved a seat for you in your own son's life story. That kind sinks in slowly. It spreads through your chest like cold water. The processional music began, a piano recording over the gym speakers. The graduates started filing in 2 by 2 in blue gowns and square caps, faces flushed with nerves and excitement. Everyone stood, chairs scraped, phones rose in the air like a field of glass. Then I saw Caleb. He was taller than I remembered in that moment. Funny how that happens. Children become themselves in front of you when you aren't ready. He walked with his shoulders straight, eyes scanning the crowd the way he always did when he was looking for me. I stood, even though nobody near me knew why. His gaze moved across the front row first. I saw him register Vanessa, my parents, Brent in the father's seat. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He kept looking. Then he found me in the back. Something in his face changed. Just a flicker. But I knew my son well enough to read it. Hurt first, then anger, then a kind of hard calm that made my stomach drop. He held my eyes for maybe 2 seconds as he kept walking. Long enough for me to know he understood everything. Long enough for me to know this wasn't over. The ceremony began with speeches from the principal and class officers. I don't remember much of them. Words about perseverance, futures, possibilities. The usual things people say to young adults, standing on the edge of the rest of their lives. Around me, families clapped and laughed at the right moments. My mother dabbed at her eyes in the front row, as if she had not just helped humiliate her own son. Brent leaned back with one ankle on his knee, perfectly at home. Vanessa kept glancing over her shoulder once in a while, checking if I was still there. I was. When they started calling names, the energy in the room changed. You could feel every family tense with anticipation, waiting for their moment. Students crossed the stage one by one, shook hands, smiled for the photographer, and stepped down to thunder from their corner of the audience. Then they called Caleb Mercer. I was on my feet before I even realized it. My hands hurt from clapping. My throat tightened so badly I couldn't shout. All I could do was stand there and look at my son as he crossed that stage with his diploma in his hand. He should have just kept walking. That was the script. Smile, shake hands, exit stage left. Let the adults preserve their fake little arrangement. But Caleb stopped. Not in the center exactly, just past the principal, near the microphone stand placed at the side for student speakers and award announcements. At first I thought maybe someone had said something to him. Maybe he was confused about where to go. Then he turned. He looked out over the gym, not panicked, not lost, deliberate. I felt every muscle in my body go taut. A teacher near the stairs stepped forward like she was about to guide him off stage. But Caleb lifted one hand slightly, polite but firm, and then reached for the microphone. The whole room changed in that second. You could hear the rustle of people lowering their programs, the squeak of the mic stand as he pulled it closer. My mother's face drained of color even from where I sat. Vanessa half rose from her chair. Brent's expression finally cracked. And me. I forgot to breathe, because I knew that look on my son's face. It was the same look he'd had when he was 12, and a bigger kid tried to shove a smaller one around at baseball camp. The same look he had when something inside him clicked into place, and silence stopped being an option. He tapped the microphone once. The sound thudded through the gym. Then he looked straight toward the front row first, and after that, toward the back where I stood frozen beside my chair. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that whatever came out of his mouth next was going to change everything. He tapped the microphone once, and the dull thud rolled through the gym like a warning. For one suspended second, nobody moved. Then Caleb spoke. "Before I leave this stage," he said, voice steady, clear, stronger than I had ever heard it in a room that size, "I need to say something, because if I don't say it now, a lot of people here are going to leave with the wrong idea." A nervous ripple moved through the audience. Some people chuckled softly, thinking maybe it was a harmless joke, a cute, unscripted graduation moment, the kind people post online with heart emojis. It wasn't. The principal stepped toward him from the side with that polite panic school administrators wear when a student goes off script. Caleb glanced at him and said respectfully, "I'll be quick, sir." Then he turned back to the crowd. "My name is Caleb Mercer," he said, gripping the microphone with one hand, diploma still tucked under his arm, "and I just spent this whole ceremony watching something that happens a lot in my life. Adults pretending they're doing what's best for me, while making decisions without asking me what I actually think." Now the room went completely still. I could feel my pulse in my throat. I wanted to run up there and stop him, protect him, shield him from whatever fallout was coming. But I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. Caleb looked toward the reserved family row. "There's a seat down there," he said, his voice sharpening just enough to cut. "That was meant to show who my father is." Vanessa stood up so fast, her chair legs scraped harshly against the gym floor. "Caleb," she said, low and warning, "enough." He didn't even look at her. "No," he said into the mic. "Actually, not enough. That's the problem." A few people in the audience gasped. You could hear the raw human intake of breath that comes when private cruelty suddenly gets dragged into public light. Caleb lifted his chin and pointed, not dramatically, just plainly, toward the front row. "That man sitting in the father's seat is my stepdad. His name is Brent. And I'm not saying he's evil or that he never helped with anything. But he is not my father." Brent's face tightened so visibly that even from the back of the gym I saw it happen. The confident mask slipped. My father looked like someone had slapped him. My mother's mouth fell open. Then Caleb turned and searched the room. This time he found me immediately. "My father," he said, and his voice changed then. It dropped lower, realer. "Is standing in the back because the people who were supposed to respect him decided it would look better to push him out." I swear the world tilted. Every head in that gym turned. Not metaphorically. Literally. Dozens. Then hundreds of faces swinging toward the back right section where I stood, frozen beside my chair, feeling suddenly exposed under the bright gym lights like I'd been dragged into the center of the room without taking a single step. I heard someone whisper, "Oh my God." Caleb kept going. "My dad is the one who taught me how to throw a curveball even though I was terrible at it for 2 years. He's the one who stayed up helping me finish projects when I procrastinated. He's the one who showed up to games, picked me up when I got sick, and answered the phone every single time I called." His voice wavered just a little there, but he steadied it. "He's the one who never made me choose between loving him and loving anyone else." That line hit the room like a stone through glass. Vanessa covered her mouth. Whether from shame, shock, or anger, I couldn't tell. Brent looked straight ahead now, jaw locked, refusing to look at anyone. My father's eyes flicked toward me, then away, then back again. And for the first time in years, he looked small. Caleb looked at the principal, then back at the audience. So if anybody here is taking pictures, or posting online, or talking later about who sat where at my graduation, I just want to make it very clear. My real father is Daniel Mercer. He pointed straight at me. Him. Every muscle in my body gave out at once, and somehow I stayed standing. Then something happened that I didn't expect. People started clapping. Not all at once. It began in scattered pockets. A woman near the aisle, a man down front. Then more, louder, until the entire gym was full of applause that sounded nothing like polite graduation clapping. It sounded startled, raw, emotional, the kind of applause people give when they know they just witnessed a truth no one was supposed to say aloud. I didn't realize I was crying until I tasted salt at the corner of my mouth. Caleb lowered the microphone slowly. He looked embarrassed for half a second, like he'd just become aware of his own heartbeat again. The principal, to his credit, didn't snatch the mic or scold him. He simply stepped forward, rested a hand lightly on Caleb's shoulder, and nodded once. Then Caleb came down the stairs from the stage. Everything after that happened in a blur. I moved before I thought. I left the back row and started down the aisle, half blind with tears, barely aware of the people stepping aside to let me pass. Some were smiling, some were staring. One woman near the center touched my arm as I went by and whispered, "Go." Caleb reached the floor at the same time I reached the front. We met between the rows of chairs, in the narrow space families usually save for flowers and hugs and staged photos. He looked at me with that same hard calm still in his eyes, but underneath it was something younger, shakier. He was still just my boy under the gown and cap, still 17, still carrying more than he should have had to carry. I pulled him into my arms. He hugged me back so hard my shoulders shook with it. For a moment the gym disappeared. The crowd, the chairs, Vanessa, Brent, my parents, all of it. It was just me and my son holding on to each other, in the middle of a room that had tried to tell us where we belonged. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though I didn't even know what I was apologizing for anymore. For being in the back, for not stopping it sooner, for every moment he had to witness adults fail him. He pulled back just enough to look at me. His eyes were red but steady. "Don't," he said. "You didn't do this." Those 6 words nearly broke me. By then the ceremony was trying, awkwardly, to continue. The principal was calling for the next graduate. Families were still buzzing. Phones were everywhere. I knew clips of what had just happened were already spreading through group texts, neighborhood chats, social media. The truth had a life of its own now. Vanessa came toward us first, not running, not dramatic, just fast enough to show panic beneath control. "Caleb," she said, keeping her voice low, "that was deeply inappropriate." He turned to her, and I saw in his face the exact moment something in him changed for good. Some final softness giving way. "No," he said. "What was inappropriate was what you did before I got on stage." Her expression hardened. "You embarrassed this family." He answered her without even raising his voice. "You did that yourself." Brent approached next, slower, with his hands open like a negotiator stepping into conflict. "Caleb, I know you're emotional." Caleb cut him off. "Please don't." Brent stopped. "My whole life," Caleb said. "Every time something got uncomfortable, everyone told me to be mature and respectful. But what they really meant was keep quiet so the adults can keep lying." Brent actually looked stunned. It was probably the first time anyone in that family system had spoken to him without fear or deference. "I never asked you to be my dad," Caleb said, "and I definitely didn't ask you to sit in his seat." Brent's ears went red. He glanced around, finally understanding the humiliation had reversed direction, and there was no clean way out of it. Vanessa reached for Caleb's arm. He stepped back before she could touch him. Then my father stood up, slowly. He looked older than he had that morning. Not physically older exactly, but diminished, as if something polished and arrogant had cracked under too much pressure. "Daniel," he said. I turned toward him. My mother stood beside him, rigid and pale, clutching her purse with both hands. He cleared his throat. This got out of hand. That was his first instinct. Not "I'm sorry," not "we were wrong." Just this got out of hand, as if the problem were volume rather than cruelty. I looked at him, and felt something settle inside me. Not rage. Rage had burned itself out. What remained was colder, cleaner. "No," I said. "It didn't get out of hand. It got exposed." My mother flinched. My father drew in a breath, clearly unused to being spoken to that way by me. "We were trying to keep peace. You gave my place to another man." "Daniel." "You did it in front of my son," I said. and my voice stayed calm, which somehow made it sharper. You asked him to sit there and watch all of you rewrite who his father is, so none of you would have to feel uncomfortable. My mother finally spoke then, her voice thin. We never said you weren't his father. I looked at the signs still clipped to the chairs. Father, stepfather. The whole ugly arrangement laid bare under fluorescent lights and watching eyes. You didn't have to say it, I told her. You showed it. She started to cry. Real tears this time, I think. But I had lived too long inside emotional performances to let tears alone move me anymore. Caleb stood beside me, silent now, but solid. I could feel him there like an anchor. The rest of the ceremony finished eventually. I barely remember it. Families took pictures in the parking lot beneath the early summer sun. Blue gowns flashed through clusters of flowers and balloons. People kept approaching us. Other parents, teachers, one assistant principal, to say versions of the same thing. He was brave. You should be proud. We saw what happened. A baseball coach I hadn't spoken to in over a year shook my hand and said quietly, "He knows who showed up for him. That matters." It mattered more than any seat ever could. Caleb wanted one photo with me alone before anything else. We stood under a maple tree near the edge of the lot, away from most of the crowd. He still had his cap on crooked. My eyes were red. Neither of us looked polished. It ended up being my favorite photo anyone has ever taken of me. Vanessa tried twice to get him to come pose with her, Brent, and the rest of them. He told her later, "Not now." Then, after another 10 minutes, "Just know, I didn't coach him. I didn't need to. He had found his own spine." That evening, after the calls and texts started flooding in, I turned my phone face down on the kitchen table and grilled burgers for Caleb on my back patio. He had come home with me, still in half his graduation clothes, tie loose, gown folded over a chair. The sunset spread orange light across the yard. Fireflies started showing up over the grass. For the first hour, neither of us talked much about the speech. We ate. We sat. We let the day come down out of our bodies. Then Caleb finally said, "Are you mad I did that?" I looked at him across the patio table. "Mad?" He shrugged. Suddenly 17 again. I know it was kind of a lot. I let out a breath that almost turned into a laugh. It was definitely a lot. His face tightened. I just couldn't let them do it. I set my plate down and leaned back. You should never have had to. The porch light hummed softly above us. Somewhere down the block a dog barked. The normal sounds of an ordinary evening after a day that had torn something open in both of us. He stared down at his hands. I've wanted to say something for years. That hurt in a way I can't fully explain. Not because I didn't know he was hurting. Because I did. But hearing that he had been carrying words for years made me realize how long he'd been absorbing things I had tried to shield him from. And failed. "I'm sorry," I said again. He shook his head. "Dad, stop apologizing for what other people did." Then he smiled. "Just barely. Besides, I think Grandpa looked like he might actually throw up." That made me laugh for real. The first honest laugh I'd had in months. And Caleb laughed too. The sound of it loosened something in the air between us. The fallout came fast after that. Video of Caleb's speech spread through the school community. In less than 24 hours. Some people praised him. Some called it disrespectful. A few relatives I hadn't heard from in years suddenly found my number to offer opinions on family matters. Staying private, which is always what people say when public truth threatens comfortable lies. Vanessa sent me 3 long texts, each one more defensive than the last. She said Caleb had been manipulated. She said I had poisoned the atmosphere by making an issue of the seating. She said Brent was devastated, and my parents were humiliated. I replied once. Caleb told the truth. Sit with that. Then I put my phone away. My father called 2 days later. I let it go to voicemail, then again the next day. Then my mother sent an email full of phrases like misunderstandings, an emotional day, and family healing. I didn't answer right away. For the first time in my life, I understood that access to me was not something people were entitled to just because they shared blood with me. A week later, Caleb made another decision, all on his own. He asked if we could have dinner with my parents. At first I thought he was trying to patch things up too quickly, but when I asked why, he said because I want to say everything once when nobody can interrupt me. Then I'm done. So we met them at a quiet restaurant off the highway. Neutral territory. My parents looked nervous when we arrived. Smaller somehow. Not humbled exactly, but shaken. Caleb did most of the talking. He told them he loved them, but what they did at graduation was cruel. He told my mother he was tired of being told to keep peace, when peace always seemed to mean siding against me. He told my father that respect didn't come from money, or appearances, or which adult seemed more convenient. It came from showing up and telling the truth. Then he said the part I will never forget. "If you want a relationship with me as I get older," he said, "you don't get to disrespect my dad and then expect me to pretend it doesn't matter." My father actually nodded. Once. Slowly. My mother cried again, but this time she listened. Things did not magically heal after that. Real life isn't built like that. There was no dramatic apology that fixed everything. No perfect reconciliation under warm music. But boundaries were drawn, and for once they were drawn by the right person. Over the months that followed, my parents changed in small, awkward ways. My father stopped mentioning Brent entirely. My mother began calling before family gatherings to ask, directly, if I was coming and whether I was comfortable with who would be there. It was clumsy, late, incomplete. But it was different. As for Brent, he kept his distance after graduation. I think public shame finally did what private tension never could. He stopped trying to play father in rooms where I was present. Vanessa hated that shift more than anyone. She had built too much of her post-divorce identity around the illusion that she had upgraded her life and improved the father figure around our son. Caleb dismantled that illusion with one microphone and 2 minutes of honesty. Today, when I think back on that graduation, I still feel the sting of walking into that gym and seeing another man in the father's seat. I still remember the sound of my mother saying practical, like she was discussing parking arrangements instead of a human heart. But that is not the part that stays with me most. What stays with me is the sound of my son's voice over that microphone. Clear, unshaking, refusing to let the room leave with a lie. People ask sometimes whether I was embarrassed by the scene. No, I was devastated by what led to it. But what Caleb did, that wasn't a scene. That was a line being drawn. A son telling the world that fatherhood is not a chair you can assign to the most convenient man in the room. It is years. It is sacrifice. It is showing up. It is quiet consistency when nobody claps for it. That night, before Caleb went upstairs to bed, he stopped in the hallway and looked back at me. "You know I meant every word, right?" he asked. The house was quiet, just the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen and the low buzz of the porch light through the window. I nodded because for a second I couldn't trust my voice. Then I said, "So did I. Every day." He smiled at that. Not big, just enough. And after he went upstairs, I stood there alone in the hallway for a long time, one hand pressed to the wall, breathing through the ache and the gratitude of it. Because after years of being talked over, replaced, relabeled, and politely pushed aside, the truth had finally stood up in a crowded room and said my name. If you've ever been made to feel invisible by the people who should have known your worth, then you already understand this. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive in a courtroom. Sometimes it walks across a graduation stage in a blue cap and gown, takes the microphone, and tells the whole room who his father really is.